and welcome to another episode of Pakistonomy. Today, I have the honor of having Mr. Raza Rumi joining us today to talk about new media, where the landscape is. And Raza needs no introduction, but for those who are unfamiliar with him, he's director at the Park Center for Independent Media, teaches in the journalism department at Cornell. He's also a visiting lecturer at the Cornell Institute for Public Affairs and the founding editor of Nayadaur Media, which is a bilingual progressive digital media platform. And he is a policy analyst, a journalist, and an author. And I think if I could spend multiple hours, this podcast will just go on and on and on, talking about a whole host of issues with Raza. But we're going to jump into and focus narrowly on the new media and the digital media landscape in Pakistan. So Raza, thank you so much for joining us on Pakistonomy today.
Thank you so much, Uzair, for the opportunity.
I want to start with Nayadaur and just the story and the thinking behind it and what the vision of the initiative was in your mind when you set it up, and how has this organization evolved over the last few months and years?
So thank you, Uzair, for your direct approach and being focused. I really appreciate that. So Nayadaur Media, I mean, it's a digital startup basically, and despite the fact it's been around for a couple of years now, it's still a baby in the works. It still has to acquire a particular long-term form and shape. But basically, as you know, that I my varied and sort of erratic career um, led me to engage with the media in Pakistan. When because I was originally a civil servant, and then I worked for many years at the Asian Development Bank as a governance specialist. And throughout my work, both in the government and both with the international development agencies, I realized how important, public opinion and public engagement was, and I still hold that very, it's something that hasn't changed. My other views keep on changing, and so in 2008 I started working for the Friday Times for and almost for a decade. I was, editing the paper and involved with the paper and writing for other publications. And then I also got into TV for a couple of years in Pakistan, and then later did the editorship of Daily Times, a national paper. And while I was working, in the traditional media, it was becoming clearer, especially in the last decade or so, that the nature of journalism, not just in Pakistan, but globally, was rapidly changing and rapidly evolving. And particularly due to the digital media technologies, as well as how many more people were online. And so I found all of my earlier work, really wanting in that respect. It was only addressing a particular kind of audience, people who buy newspapers or people who just sit in front of TV and change channels. And I was very much engaged in new media right at the very start, because I set up my own blog in 2005, Jahane Rumi, and it's still there, but it's more like an archival website now. And I founded Park Tea House in 2007, which emerged as a major platform for young writers, new voices, alternative opinions, because the real Park Tea House in Lahore, a historical place of learning and exchange and sort of intellectual musings, had been shut down. So I thought, let's do it virtually. So I had a sort of a background and a keen desire to engage with new media. And so when I moved to the US in 2014, obviously my work was also disrupted, because I had to leave in peculiar circumstances, suddenly, without plan, without anything. And I was doing all sorts of things. I started teaching, as you just mentioned. But obviously, once you are in the sort of habit of writing and engaging with the media, you don't want to give that up. So I met a few interesting people in overseas Pakistanis in the diaspora who were very concerned about the state and the quality of traditional corporate media in Pakistan, particularly the TV industry, because I mean these people, I mean they're about four or five doctors, really well qualified, but they are socially engaged both in Pakistan and in the US, and they were very keen to set up something like the NPR, the
Mm,
NPR model.
mm.
Obviously, it's a very ambitious undertaking,
Well, that's
and the
interesting. Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt here. That the
yeah,
idea was NPR because as you were explaining your own journey and how Nayadaur came about, I was thinking of Vox and what like Ezra Klein did at Vox Media, for example, because he started as a blogger, felt there was a need for wonkier, nuanced, more in-depth analysis, and I was thinking of Nayadaur as that. But sorry to interrupt there, but go on. Like NPR was the model initially that they
yeah.
wanted.
Initially NPR, and then of course Vox is very much. I'm a regular follower of Vox and Vice and all these new platforms. But in particular, what has really inspired me is Democracy Now,
Mm,
which is a smaller independent media outlet, but here huge outreach, really credible, really sort of adversarial in many ways, and totally different from the mainstream TV industry in America. And that's a subject I teach at Ithaca College as well, the independent media sector in the US, which is non-corporate, non-profit,
yep.
subscription-based, public-funded, which is free of the imperatives of the corporations and their economic or business interests. So with the help of these people, and there was a very generous businessman in Karachi as well, and they all started contributing very small amounts every month to raise a little bit of money so that we could, hire a uh, videographer, hire a website editor, somebody who could set up the website, and so it came into being, and it still remains very small, and that's a major challenge, and we can talk later when we come to that. I mean, the financial or the business model is a global issue with the media industry or media outlets, and we are no different. But what has happened over time is that Nayadaur has made some impact and found traction, so it also gets a lot of flack by a variety of constituencies in the Pakistani cyberspace, and people think it's something really big and some kind of a huge organization with hundreds of staff. Actually, not. It's a very small team of three, four people,
Mm-hmm.
including me. And for me, I cannot even be full time engaged in it because of my other responsibilities. But my primary objective has been to not only engage the young journalists, young writers, young videographers or thinkers, but also to create a platform which sort of speaks to the younger people, or people who are on and most young people are online. They're on Facebook or Twitter or
Mm-hmm.
Instagram or and other spaces. And how do we engage with them when so much of bombardment of both right wing news, right wing commentaries, and distorted or information. Some would even call it disinformation. So while in the days that I was doing this, the Panama case was underway in Pakistan, which was like completely you know, and being reported and commented in a very controlled narrative. So everybody was convinced, including many members of my family, that Panama Papers prove Nawaz Sharif's corruption and other politicians and whoever there, and therefore there was a time to fix this and remove him and others like Nawaz Sharif from power and bring in a clean government into office. So so such was the power of mainstream media at that time, and there were very very few people who were kind of swimming against the tide. And then so that was the impetus, and in that time I was mulling over and noting that whatever critical or alternative opinion or information was available, it was available on the social media. So based on that, I think it was a very timely intervention in my view, and I hope it kind of grows. I mean, of course, it's a startup, it's young, it can make mistakes, it can falter at different points, just the way babies fall down while they're
Yeah.
walking, when they learn how to walk. So I'm hoping that it turns and grows and sort of is not just one of those initiatives which start and then die.
I want to touch, I mean, a couple of very interesting things you mentioned, right? One was sort of the young audience is online, they consume their content on YouTube, Facebook, they're on social media. But there's also this belief in mainstream Pakistan. And the way I've increasingly started thinking about it is that the palate of the Pakistani listener or the consumer of information is used to junk food diet or is used to the mirch masala diet. So when you bring in something more nuanced, like, if you're thinking about food, an Italian pasta dish or a French cuisine, they won't get it because the flavor profile is so nuanced that it won't work, and they'll be like, "Ye kya le aaye ho," right? What has been your sort of, as you've been on this journey and see the audience online, the comments coming in, and we'll touch upon the flack part just in a bit because I want your opinion on a couple of other things that have happened in Pakistan. But in terms of the quality and the nuance of content, what have you found in terms of the how the audience responds to something that is very much different from what the mainstream diet is in terms of media?
So I think you're absolutely right. Your diagnosis is very correct. I mean, in the sense that the way media functions. I mean, not just in Pakistan, actually. To be honest, I mean it's a global thing. I mean, look at
Yeah.
what happens in the U.S. The local cable TV, the noisy, screaming headlines, and all the online outlets. With all sorts of dubious stories. So the situation is not too different in Pakistan either. In fact, it's accentuated because there are fundamental things which the Pakistani media does not cover. So one of the objectives that we had and still have in mind was that how do we bring in some kind of or raise public consciousness about things like climate change, public health, education, water and sanitation, women's rights, child rights, yeah, all sorts of agenda. And our experience was kind of mixed. Initially we used to do text-based videos, short videos with text as explainers, and the traction, frankly speaking, wasn't really that great. I mean, it still is the case when you do a program against the ill effects of tobacco. Only, let's say, 200 people come on the live session, as opposed to if you do a live stream on Imran Khan, or Imran Khan versus Nawaz Sharif, or Nawaz Sharif versus establishment, and you have thousands
Hmm.
who immediately jump. Well, part of the it has to do with the fact that people also have come to the conclusion that what the mainstream media is telling them is not the full picture. It is distorted or controlled or sanitized, or particularly designed uh, to not give the full picture of what's going on. So one imperative is that, but the other way is that whenever you do storytelling with a human angle, where real human beings and their real issues and their real stories find where you can bring in all those messages. You can bring in messages whether it's about health or it's about education or poverty or inequality, and some of those stories have really done well. So for example, I'll give a few former students of LUMS, which is a very good institution. So don't get me wrong, but they have this stream of scholarship students, who get a full scholarship, I think 10% or whatever, 20%. And so they started writing their stories of what they faced as young, students entering into an elitist university. And those stories got so much traction because they spoke to so many people, about the class difference, about the lifestyles, about how an outsider in an elite institution fares, and we have tried to give space to all sorts of stories, but obviously with an angle which kind of with the view to educate the public on vital issues. So the mirch masala, as you said, the spice, sadly, is a requirement. It's not going to go away in the short term or even in the medium term. But I am very hopeful that as we go along, as more and more people engage with the serious issues with online outlets, because there have been other outlets that have come into being. Nayadaur is not the only one. I mean, there's Soch. You may have seen that. There is, Sojag has really done a makeover. There's another one called Current PK, which is more tilted towards entertainment than news, etc. But they are all online and they're all bringing out fresh, new ways of presenting content and stories. So they have. So I guess as more and more people engage with this, you would build an informed audience. And now we have, so for example, we have since, the pandemic in 2020, while it was devastating in so many ways, but it had some silver linings because we could do live streams, we could do live YouTube videos. And since June, we started doing that. And, the response has been overwhelming. I mean, in the sense that, not just that every video is sort of seen by thousands of people, sometimes even more than 100,000 people, but also you have now, we feel that, we are building an online audience, and that audience is not interested in spice or, fights or, name calling. Imran is this, Nawaz is this. No, I mean, they are interested in issues. They want to know why democracy doesn't work in Pakistan. What is the problem with
Mm.
political parties? What are the issues of the economic management by the current government? Or what are the key long-standing crises of governance that every government in Pakistan faces? So that's been a really hopeful sign, if I may summarize it like that, because which basically shows that there are people out there. They want to engage with serious stuff, and nobody's reaching out. No, I mean, they don't have many alternatives, because
Yeah.
the channels in Pakistan, I'm sure you follow them very closely there. I know because you keep on tweeting about what you see and experience, is that, it's a copycat formula. It's a copy. You go to X, you open ARY, and you'll see three politicians from three different parties abusing each other, and the anchors are very smartly creating an inflammatory or a really divisive, conflictual discourse, or you would see, a typical well-known, analysts who have a particular view and politics, which we are quite familiar with. And, I just don't want to name names, but, they're everywhere, every evening. And they say the same thing every day. Every day they say politicians are corrupt. Every day so it's a drumming in of this message in the public mind that, everything evil has to do with politicians in Pakistan. If you remove that, things are going to get so much better,
Hmm.
like the Ayub Khan model that our prime minister praises, with the military boss on very good terms with the US, and a very capable bureaucracy running the country. And democracy, oh well, forget it. What does it even
Well,
mean?
even just that, there's so much confusion, right? Because on the one hand, on that point, you have the idea of Riyasat-e Medina, and then you very quickly flip on to we need a transition period like the United States or a presidential system like the United States, and then you very quickly transition into we need a Chinese model because look what they've done. And just in terms of as someone who's read democracy, not even democracy, like political economy, how do institutions functions across a whole host of countries based on their unique experiences, I can't wrap my head around how those three things somehow come together and are articulated in a way that people still buy into. And I'm like, wait a minute, like the core principles of all three systems is in direct conflict with each other. Forget about even the checks and balances of the American system, for example, right? And it just doesn't add up. But you mentioned the Mirch Masala thing. I think what I see Nayadaur and others trying to do is basically meet an unserved and an unarticulated need of the audience, right? And so as you start meeting and serving that need, and people get educated while watching you, it's a journey, it's a two-way journey between the institution, Nayadaur in this case, for example, but also the listener, who over time will develop that sophisticated palate where you are still initially giving that healthy dose of red chili flakes in terms of getting them there, but you're adding other flavors on top, and over time you build that, right? And I think that's a very important contribution in terms of informing the public. And as more people digitize, come online, you will see that transition happen, and hopefully that breaks the Groundhog Day like issue with Pakistan, where things keep repeating itself. Like you said, Ayub Khan, you can just go back and read newspaper articles from the 50s, 60s, and fast forward to 2020, and pretty much the diagnosis is still the same: corruption, politics, bad bureaucracy. And if we just break this, everything will be fine, which is not, it's not as simple as that. I want to touch upon a couple of things, like as you sort of grown in Nayadaur. What are some assumptions that you initially had, like that you look back initially, in time and say, okay, I thought this was the way it was going to evolve. Obviously the pandemic has changed everything, right? From YouTube live sessions to people's appetite to coming on webinars, etc. But what were some other assumptions that you had that were tested, you had to change course, and you sort of learned along the way that this was a different way of doing things?
Yeah, so lots of learning there. Of course, first of all, the important learning has been that it is very difficult to get digital marketing and revenues. It's a very nascent and a very underdeveloped area in Pakistan. PayPal doesn't work, for example. So when you ask people to contribute money, I mean, how do they do it in Pakistan? And then there are all sorts of restrictions. I mean, with the with banks, and also, I mean, these are just the logistical issues. But I think the real challenge, or a case in learning, has been to find and hit the right kind of audience. So initially we were like covering everything. Initially it was like all over the place, and then more, and with time we have started becoming more focused and finding the right target audience. I mean, to build a particular brand and a particular following and a particular engagement. So we're still in that process. I think that has been a major learning point. But I just want to actually say a bit more on an earlier point, which over time the informed audience develops, and for that you have to create those spaces. So Uzair, I mean, you are much younger than I am. When I was growing up, as in school, etc., there used to be a great magazine called Viewpoint, which was published from Lahore by progressives. And I used to, I still remember in A levels, my teacher used to have those copies, and he would loan them to me, and that was completely different from what was in the main newspaper. I mean, TV was very controlled because PTV was the only channel, and it was General Ziaul Haq's martial law. But Viewpoint, and then we had Frontier Post, which was a very sort of groundbreaking newspaper for quite some time, until it also has really come down and crashed. And then in more recent years, in the 2000s, we had the example of Daily Times, which was set up by Salman Taseer and Najm Sethi, which initially came out to be a really amazing paper with really smart and sharp commentaries, and really well curated, verified news. And that, sadly, I became its editor. That's also gone down the drain. This is a so there's a problem of sustaining these models and the institutions, and that has been one learning point. And now, so what we are trying to build our future engagement is that how do we earn more from YouTube? How do we earn more from websites, so that we become totally financially self-sustaining, self-financed, and we don't have to ask for donors or go here and there to individuals and say कि भाई आप दे दिया करें 5,000 रुपए महीने के or
Hmm.
whatever. So that has also been part of our learning process. But again, I just want to also add another point that the US has a big and a very vibrant tradition of dissenting or alternative media, throughout its history. Even when slavery was there were small papers calling for abolition of slavery. In the 19th century, there were papers dedicated to labor rights. The Chicago Defender, which said that there should be an 8-hour working week. There should be hours should be regulated. There should be health benefits and insurance and security for the workforce. And later on, for women's rights in the 20th century, more anti-war kind of sentiment. Whether it was Vietnam or other misadventures that the U.S. often engages in abroad. There were journalists and publications. And one particular publication I want to mention is the I.F. Stone Weekly. So I.F. Stone, or also known as Izzy Stone, was this journalist, very popular, very well regarded as well, even with people who didn't agree with him. And he was really scathing and anti-establishment. I mean, he used to work from his house in DC and bring out this weekly paper, which even Einstein used to subscribe to, and Marilyn Monroe. Look at the range. And it was always exposing the lies of the government, whether it was the war or the economy or the political machinations in the capital. And India has had that tradition, and online you must have seen, outlets like The Wire, that have also emerged, and they are again telling you a totally different picture from the mainstream Indian corporate media, which is, as you just saw recently, how compromised it is, completely in bed with the security establishment and the political government in Delhi. So what I'm trying to say is that what I see personally, I feel, and I view Nayadaur as part of this continuum. What is happening globally in Europe as well? Multiple outlets, multiple websites have emerged in response, or in fact, even in protest against what the mainstream media is doing to public information and the public mind. And in Pakistan, though, it's even worse, and we can talk about that because I think I'll let you ask your next question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important and a good segue into my next question, right? I think that room, that platform for dissent or even questioning what is considered quote unquote fundamental truths in any society, I think you have to have an institution or a set of institutions that question and vigorously question that, not by misinforming. We're seeing this in the United States because, we've had since November a conspiracy theory that is now believed by 2 in 3 or 3 in 4 Republicans that the election was stolen. Again, that type of questioning is a different set, and it's on the other side of the spectrum. But you need that type of space in a country like Pakistan. But in Pakistan, what tends to then happen is that a Nayad or a Soch or what have you, when they start asking this, you mentioned Panama, right? So let's stick to that when you were asking the pointed questions around Panama and what was going on with the investigation and under the garb of this idea that we need a quote unquote clean government, you get labeled as an agent or working with foreign adversaries. Recently, it's about fifth generation hybrid warfare, right? And everyone gets lumped into that. How do you then navigate that space and function within it?
That's, honestly speaking, that's a really stressful part of this whole work. And sometimes when I see an abusive tweet or a whole thread targeting me, I just say, why the hell am I doing this? I mean, I have my other vocations. I can just have a nice, enjoyable life in both
Yeah,
Pakistan
you
and the
could
US.
go skiing in upstate New York and just enjoy your winter
Exactly,
versus doing
exactly.
Nayador.
Yeah, or come back to Pakistan and join one of the corporate, companies as a communications or whatever, policy, government affairs, and have a nice life, play golf or whatever. But I'll tell you that is the most problematic part, the fifth generation warfare, as you said. I mean, part of or hybrid warfare, actually, that's what the initial term was, and now the more popularized version is the fifth generation. And, honestly, I've been trying to research on it. I interviewed a few people, and I still have to come to a working definition and contents of what a fifth generation warfare entails. But that's a separate story. So when I started when I entered the TV industry, from 2010, I was regular on Pakistani television channels. Late 2009 to 10, I was a regular, sort of commentator until I got my own show with a new channel in Islamabad, and then I was every day, every night there. So in those days, again, my views bothered a lot of people, and they used to say you're an Indian agent because you're speaking the Indian language. And I, incidentally, one of my very first book is called Delhi by Heart. It's actually a travelogue into the past, into the Muslim past, if I may add, of Delhi, right? Verse suits the Zaid Hamid version of history very well, if you think about it, that it was once
If they
ours.
actually bother reading it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So exactly. And they said, he writes a book called that. So he's an Indian agent, he's a raw agent, and there were these Twitter threads, and I used to laugh at them initially until what I went through in 2014, near assassination attempt. And then I left, of course, and I told you what I was doing, and I'm still doing abroad. And now with this Nayadaur gaining traction, now that there's a new thing called the CIA agent. And how do the Mavericks find that? Because in the summer of 2016, I spent 3 months at a organization called the National Endowment for Democracy as a fellow, where I actually was working on a book project, which is still in the works. That's a separate story. And it's there in the public that what my topic was, my face, my everything. And so they've taken that website as a proof, you know, remember
Well,
that I'm
really quickly pause on that. That's super interesting. I did not know that, but it is hilarious because the NED gets its funding the same way the USIP does. And Pakistan's current NSA acting or whatever, the special advisor is an alum of USIP. So if that's the logic, then there is a lot of questioning to be done in terms of how you go from NED and USIP to serving the country. But anyways, continue.
what to do. But and just to add, my first fellowship was at USIP. So obviously the trolls, the hyper patriotic trolls have ignored that. They've just focused on that one where they could find. So that's obviously a way to discredit me and discredit Nayadaur. But generally to again put a shut my mouth. Now they can't really, because I'm half or more than half the time I'm in the US. So maybe it's not that easy, and because it's all online, so where would you go and clamp down on the other? You have a junk building, so you can go and put a lock, or a TV station. You can go and physically seal it, but how do you seal that something which is all operating online? So I don't know what the issue. So they've picked up because and I was a fellow at USIP, and I'm very happy and proud, and I'm very thankful because I wrote a major big report there, which is on the internet, and I'm I'm kind of I was in a post-traumatic state when I left the country, and after a few months I got this fellowship, and I was very happy that I'm doing something productive, putting together all what I'd learned or was learning on paper. And then I was also I had a brief stint with New America Foundation. So this agent line is very long. So I don't know how will they decide which one to target me for. But that this is a problem which has actually is partly located. I'm not even going to go and say a conspiracy theory that X is getting this propaganda out against me. Whether it's a political party, because a lot of these people are both PTI supporters and avid supporters of the establishment. So, but I will not blame them. I will not blame them because this is what we have taught them. This is what we have taught them through our curricula, our textbooks. This is what we teach them day in and day out on television, through newspaper columns, which their elders have read in the newspapers, and this is what sells on social media. So I can just go and say, this guy Uzair Yunus, I have information that Uzair Yunus, is a KGB guy, and I will write this, and you cannot really. All you'll do is you'll attack. You'll say, you liar. You'll report my
Yeah.
tweet. Maybe Twitter might, take it down, but Twitter doesn't do that unless it's Trump, right? Big shots get censored on Twitter. So, uh, but that's the state of that's the other side of new media, which is it's vile, it's filthy, abusive, and potentially dangerous side. But just going back to the earlier, so what we have done, so our newspapers, the Urdu newspapers, it's especially, and the Urdu column for decades has been a kind of well of conspiracy theories. So there were theories that Dr. Abdul Salam, who's the first Nobel laureate from Pakistan, we should be proud of his work, and I personally am, and I'm sure you are too. So there were these columnists, really senior columnists, who have written in the mainstream newspapers that Abdul Qadir Khan was selling the nuclear program to Israel. He was giving them the details. And poor Abdul Salam was not even fully involved in the evolution of a nuclear program. तो कहाँ से देगा बेचारा? They when Pakistan was fighting US's war in Afghanistan, the first one, you have to see how the newspapers built the mythical legends of the Taliban. They are these secret warriors blessed by Almighty Allah, and they will go and they will push the Soviet Union out, and all the kufr, or quote unquote, heretics will be the Soviet atheists will be fired, and the world will turn into a paradise for Muslims. It's and then the same narrative, these people who had been trained, and the space which had been given, were later justifying what the TTP was doing.
Yeah.
TTP was killing us Pakistanis, our soldiers, our heroes, our police walas, our security forces, our shops, markets, dargahs, you name it. And then, because you had pushed that genie out of the bottle, and that's why part of this media work, part of Nayadaur's, because going back to your initial questions about the genesis and the rationale, raison d'etre, is to counter this nonsense. This nonsense that, you see this nonsense against Malala, a young woman whom we should be proud of for her bravery, as a young, even as a child, she was blogging, and about education. What can be more than the schools in my area? So that is supposed to be anti-Pakistan. So they do this to Malala, they do this to Abdul Salam, they do this to any other person who takes up a particular cause, and media becomes, mainstream media is a culprit. There's a famous TV presenter, now turned politician, and on his show on mainstream TV, watched by millions, once he berated the Ahmadi community. Within a few days, we saw Ahmadis being gunned down. The second time, he berated the Shia community, and it was so that you allow people to make these abusive and senseless and completely crazy remarks about your fellow citizens, just based on their faith or their sect or whatever. So we have created this. So the media is no sort of bubble in the society. It is what the society is. It is what the society shapes it, and it kind of sometimes amplifies it. So what we have to do, I guess, not just through Nayadaur, I mean, that's a little fry, but I guess in general, in our online engagement, in our public affairs, in our public engagement work, is how do we counter this kind of disingenuous myth making, lies, disinformation, misinformation, and I guess it's a tough agenda ahead.
Yeah, and as you were describing all of that, I was thinking back to my early teen years, post 9/11 in Karachi, and we used to get Jung, Dawn, and every once in a while either Awam or Ummat at home. And I remember reading Ummat and reading all sorts of weird stuff that would then somehow find its way. And as I got older, I realized what exactly you were explaining, that it would find its way to the mimbar of the mosque, where it would be either about Nike is a Greek goddess, so if you wear Nike shoes or Nike socks, your namaz will not be accepted, or if you have had young boys go into Afghanistan after the US invasion of Afghanistan, that they're being helped by the angels. And a few weeks later, you obviously realize that almost all of them died in bombing raids conducted by the American Air Force because they were enemy militants. Or like for the one of the ones that always stuck with me was when Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan died, and there were whole columns written about how his grave was uncovered and he was in this punishing position by God because he was a singer. And all those things came from either an ummat or an ummat like publication and then found its way on the Friday sermon. And you're absolutely right. It fed an entire generation and continues to feed an entire generation with all sorts of ridiculous junk theories that become truth because they repeat it so often, right? And I think that that is a big challenge for any society to counter. um, a couple of finishing questions on this. I mean, you've explained the reason and the vision behind Nayadaur, and I want to touch upon sort of your personal sort of theory of changes. The question I've been asking more and more people over time is, you're involved in trying to change the narrative, trying to inform the public about what's going on in the country, what the solutions are, and what the issues are, away from the mainstream. But what is your personal, but you've written books, etc., all sorts of stuff. What is your personal theory of change when it comes to Pakistan? Like, how does the country exit out of this loop that it's found itself in for at least the last 5 6 decades?
I know that you had warned me of this question, but frankly, I did not really prepare for it, and forgive me for that. So I'll ramble a bit. But before that, I just want to make a little addition. This term theory of change is also a bit problematic to me because as you perhaps you may or may not know, I also consulted. I mean, I used to be a consultant in the development sector, and this whole theory of change business is just too donor centric, and it just triggers me. Yeah, I can go on a different direction. But yes, what in all seriousness, it's a very valid and a very important question, and thanks for raising it. So I say there's no one thing. I mean, I think it's a set of certain ideas which would comprise such a vision or a strategy or of change. And I think generally it's about five things in general. And five things, and I will start with the first and foremost. And first and the foremost happens to be a complete redirection of the state, how it defines itself, how it views itself, how it projects itself, and how it functions. And I know this is complicated, but I guess that for too long Pakistan has viewed itself from since the 1947, when we came into being as a very vulnerable country with a big hostile neighbor, and Sardar Patel saying Pakistan is going to go away, and Nehru saying, oh, one day it may not survive. So we have this thing of insecurity. So the national security paradigm that we have espoused, and everybody, and people say it's the military, whatever. No, politicians do that. Our thinkers, our intelligentsia, everybody's into it. I guess that needs to change, and that needs to shift towards something else. It needs to shift to a developmental welfarist state, just like the models we know, and there are no surprises. We know China, next door to Pakistan, has eliminated poverty. Eliminated is the word. I mean, when I used to work with ADB, we used to write in our documents to reduce poverty, objective number one. And I would say, why reduce? It means some poverty is okay. It's a very neoliberal imagination of poor and poverty. Well, but China has demonstrated that it has reduced poverty. Look at South Korea, look at Malaysia, look at so many other countries, which are overtly developmental states. So we need to have that priority where economic growth, public welfare, services, domestic investment, not foreign investment, sorry, which is a huge obsession in Pakistan and all the Pakistan's writers, foreign investment upar hogi, nature hogi, big deal. You need domestic, you need to generate domestic investment for jobs, right? And that's how you get economic growth. So that's one. Number two is again a redefinition, which is the redefinition of a this self-identification of as a Islamic nationalist country with the Ummah's, Thekedar of Ummah, that everything that goes wrong in the Muslim Ummah, Pakistan is somehow responsible to lead and to, so you have brainwashed generations that today thousands and thousands of people come on the streets and say boycott France or throw nukes at France because some idiot there has made some blasphemous cartoons or in Denmark. I mean, where is it coming from? It's coming from this imagination. We can't blame the mullahs all the time. We can't blame our faith. Our faith has no such thing. It is a very well crafted, deliberate policy of legitimacy that state has adopted because it's not delivering growth, jobs, services, clean water, health. So it's giving this, जिसे हम उर्दू में कहते हैं चूरन, this little sort of appetizer which is meant to keep you happy and going. You are the leader of Ummah, you're the castle of Islam, you're the fortress of Islam, and that has, I personally feel, that has influenced and impacted generations in Pakistan. So
And
Pakistanis are,
and
yeah,
sorry, really quickly, the children is selectively deployed, right? So the France will get protests, Israel will get it. Maybe nothing too much about the Rohingya and what's going on in Myanmar. Definitely nothing about Xinjiang and the Uyghurs, for example. So it's selectively deployed again to maneuver the state around, the limitations of that definition itself.
absolutely. So well put, Uzair. Thank you for adding that. Selective and completely hypocritical, because the Muslims in Pakistan, when they are attacked by extremists or by terrorists, the condemnation is divided. Some people say, oh, they asked for it. Why are they Shia? Why are they Ahmadis? Why are they Christians? Why haven't they converted to a good majoritarian Sunni faith? So obviously, it's all linked to that identification. And sadly, again, this has been espoused right from the time of our first Prime Minister, Liaquat Ali Khan, who was a good guy in other respects. But in this respect, he bungled and laid the foundation of what we are experiencing today. It was done by Bhutto. So I repeat that it is not, it is fashionable in Pakistan to lay the blame for everything at the door of the military. And people forget that these so secularists, modern Muslim, Liaquat was a modern Muslim, secular in
Well,
approach, in
I was
perspective.
going to ask you, like, so you mentioned Liaquat Ali Khan. I personally believe that the original sin was the objectives resolution, which was pushed by Liaquat Ali Khan. Was
There
wondering
you
what
go.
your opinion on that was.
Absolutely, the original sin, and Liaquat Ali Khan did it for his own legitimacy. He had no constituency in Pakistan. He was elected in an area which was in India, United India, and so he had to build and become this Thekedar of Ummah. And from the objectives resolution to today's Riyasat-e Medina, trust me, there's just a difference in words or phrases and reshuffling of the same vocabulary, but it's the same. it's
Yep.
it's it's just not the. So that's the second one. We are a territorial nation state. There are 4 federating units. There are other territories. We are a land with a 5,000 years of history. We are the inheritors of Gandhara civilization, of the great Indus Valley civilization, and everything is Pakistani. Being Pakistani is not just about being a Sunni and a Punjabi, which I am, thankfully and proudly, but but it's way beyond. The Baloch is also a Pakistani. The Zikri is also a Pakistani. The Ahmadi is also a Pakistani. The dissident is also a Pakistani. The guy in Northwest, who's chanting slogans against the state, she is also a Pakistani. Maybe angry, maybe upset, maybe crying, maybe allergic to the statehood for the moment, but remains a Pakistani. You just cannot treat them in that manner. So that's two. The third, obviously, Uzair, I mean, it's a cliche, but let's face it, man. When it comes to the list of countries with the highest number of school-going kids out of school, Pakistan tops, or at least is in the top three or two. I mean, it is no matter of pride that on the one hand you say that we are, this country of 220 million people with nukes, and half of our school going age kids, are half or 40%, 30%, they're out of school. And those who are in school, let's not even go there, what they're being taught. Are they employable? Can they think? Can they learn? So obviously, that's a crisis. Again, going back to the first point, the way South Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Japan, they all grew. They all are examples in the last 50, 60 years who have done well. Or Vietnam, they have not advanced without education, a skilled workforce, without technical and vocational education. Even today, when I was working in the development sector. So we used to start every report that, only the public supply of technical vocational training only caters to 5% of the demand. And after 10 years, I've changed my careers, I've changed my location, I'm changed as a person, I've aged, it still remains the same.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 5.5% or 6%. I mean, it's shameful. It's truly shameful. Where we are not, and I'm not saying this in a cursive way, बच्चों को पढ़ाना बड़ा अच्छा है, या मुझे दुश्मन के बच्चों को पढ़ाना है. No, because without that, you're not going to turn into a manufacturing, a rich economy. You're not going to turn into a knowledge economy. All these buzzwords that gurus like you write all the time in your articles and tweets, they are unrealizable without this foundation, without this basis.
Well,
And
so on that, like, I'm glad you brought this up because it's become a data point I often repeat to people is that Pakistan has the lowest youth literacy rate after Afghanistan in the region. Not only that, but if you look at literacy rates for the youth, for children, and you look at child mortality rate, you are now better off being born in a Rwanda than in a Pakistan. And I think that should make people think about the fact that the country ravaged by civil war, ravaged by a genocide, has been able to do what you're describing, become a developmental state and educate its people and give them a better quality of health at birth than Pakistan, which is a nuclear armed country.
thank you, Zaid. Thank you for bringing in Rwanda. Now I'm going to attack you on Twitter tomorrow and say that you are anti-Pakistan because you compared this tiny African country with our mighty Indus. Uh, so, but that's a reality. That's exactly my point. But what I'm saying is, countries have done it. Countries in our neighborhood have done it. Countries are doing it. Vietnam, a war ravaged country where the Americans, I don't know, sprayed what kind of gases and arms that a generation was impaired, is on the path of high development. I've been to Vietnam as a staffer of ADB. I visited it 3 or 4 times, I think Hanoi and other parts, and I was just blown away. I was blown away by the way the state was focused on growth. I was blown away by the fact that the states, the governments had a plan, and they knew how to implement it. So, that's a third one. Uh, there are two left. The fourth one, obviously, what I mentioned as number two is a change that Islamic nationalist narrative to a territorial nation state idea, and which would basically mean that we have to then think of secularizing the country. I use this word very carefully. I know I'll get lots of bashing for it. I have received bashing and bullets at one point, but I think there is simply no alternative than to fix our laws, our institutions, our constitutional provisions, and create Pakistan for all Pakistanis, and go back to Jinnah's original ideal of Pakistan, where he very clearly, as in his first speech as a head of the state, whatever Jinnah may have said before as a politician, and yes, he said many contradictory things, and people always cite that. That's of no value, because when you are a head of the state, you are speaking in a different way. I mean, why can't people get this simple point? I don't know. But anyway, there's this whole baggage in history. He said, this is a country for all faiths. People should have religious freedom. I'll go ahead and I would go one step further, that not just that we have to give religious freedom not as some benefactors, but we also have to ensure that they are totally mainstreamed in our society, and and as far as possible, affirmative action has to be used. So why should the Christians in the Punjab be always sweepers? Why should you advertise posts saying that, Christians must only apply to this post of a cleaner? I mean, how demeaning, and so on and so forth. It's a long list. And I think that is going to reduce the tensions, that is going to reduce the fault lines, all that we've experienced. We need to harmonize our society. And number five is federalism. Federalism has been Pakistan's perennial challenge. It has lack of federalism, lack of a workable federalist formula led us to the disaster in 1971, where we lost the majority. I'm not going to moan and say, oh, we lost our brothers and sisters. Yes, we do that. But the reality is that if that was not a wake up call for Pakistan, then what could it be? And why did it happen? It simply happened that, the two wings did not have a formula, a just, equitable, mutually agreed, democratic formula to share power, resources, etc., etc. 18th Amendment is a good step in that direction, but it's an incomplete step, because it won't be complete until you devolve powers from the provinces to the local governments. So federal, when I talk of federalism, it's not just about Islamabad giving a few ministerial crumbs to provinces or extra money. It means that you devolve power and authority right to the mohalla or the union council level, and you make this functional. So I think these are the five things that I always talk. I mean, I recently wrote a long piece, and the five was a different formula. But for this particular discussion, I've added the two, which have to do with narrative. How do you imagine as a, so, I'll tell you, there was a British Council survey in 2010, I think, where when young people were asked this question, how do they identify themselves, as a Muslim or a Pakistani, majority said Muslim first, which is great. I mean, I've nothing against their faith, but no, Muslim, their ethnic identity, i.e. Pashtun or Sindhi or whatever, and then Pakistani. So I think it's worrying for me. I'm not saying that, being a Muslim is bad, good or bad, or being a Pashtun is a good or bad thing. But for me, we've not been able to achieve that particular project of, and we keep on talking about national unity and integration and do all these silly lip service on 14th August and 23rd March. But the reality is that we are not going to integrate people until the political, economic, civil, and cultural rights are assured by the state, are provided by the state, and everyone gets their share of the national pie. And I'll end here.
I think I know you said that you hadn't prepared for this question, but that was a fantastic answer, and I wrote all 5 points down, and I fully agree with you on all of them. I think you need to fundamentally do all these five things if you're to progress as a society. So I'll just leave it there, because I don't think I can add anything on top of it right now. Before I let you go, last question: what are two or three books that have greatly influenced you personally? It can be on Pakistan or anything else, that you recommend audience, listeners, viewers pick up and read.
Oh, that's again, there's so many books which have influenced me, and the list is like really, really long. But I mean, I can cite three of my favorites. So I won't. I'm not sure if they really changed. Well, they did. I mean, so one is of course the Masnavi by Rumi. Diwane Shamse Tabriz, what he calls that. It's now available in all languages, multiple translations for those who are watching, if they're watching in Pakistan. उर्दू में भी बहुत अच्छी मिलती हैं. Original Persian, I've been struggling to read it in the original Persian. So that is when I was reading Rumi, I the inspiration for my last name, and which was a pen name, came in that time when I in the late 90s, when I was reading lots and lots and lots of Rumi, his life, his poetry, his works. I still do try and do that. So that has changed my mind, not just because it's a spiritual text, but I think it's a text there which has enabled me to engage with myself and with the world around me, and look at my position as a human being in a totally different light. And that's why Rumi remains, after what, 600-700 years, one of the most influential poets in the world today, even in 21st century. So the second one, I mean, I mean, there are all these books on politics, etc. But there's one guy, I'm sure you may have heard of him, Erich Fromm, who was a, kind of a thinker and a philosopher and a psychologist, all sort of psychologist. And there's this book called The Art of Loving. So I always that's a book which is very dear to me. I read it when I first read it. I really did not kind of get it, but I think as I have grown older, I revisit that book and always feel kind of inspired by the everyday gems. And again, it has to do with self knowledge. See, really, before we set out to change the world, we need to change ourselves. That is what the message of every great philosopher and thinker has been. In our context, Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan, this late 19th century thinker, writer, scholar, what was he saying? He was saying the Muslims need to think and to reflect on their own, about themselves, and change themselves. Angrezi paro, learn English, get educated, know about science, know about the world, have an inquiring mind, reject dogma, reject superstition. Sanskrit was just amazing. So, we have this whole history of this inquiring mind, and I think that's what I would say as the second one. And the third is, of course, one of my eternally favorite novels by a major 20th century writer, Qurratulain Hyder. And it's her book, it's a magnum opus novel called Aag Ka Darya, which is she also translated as herself, and not a great translation, but others have also done it. It's called The River of Fire. And it's basically a history of the Indian subcontinent, uh, narrated through fictional characters uh, over the last 1,000 years. So it's a huge canvas, and it comes right into the 1950s pe end hota hai. But it kind of it again lets you understand who we are and where are we coming from, not from the kind of textbooks that we have grown up with, or not the kind of doctored narratives that are fed, but it's actually engagement with that entire range of shades of past and the
Well,
present as well.
I have personally struggled through reading Rumi, and I think over time will one day manage to finish it. But it is fantastic, and it is worth going back to every once in a while to think about certain things a different way. The other two are on my list, so thank you for sharing that. I think River of Fire will be top of mind because it's a topic I've been personally thinking about more and more in terms of how did we get to where we were, or where we are now. So thank you so much for those recommendations. Thank you so much for your time. This was a fantastic conversation. And wishing you all the best with Nayadaur and with everything else that you're doing. I think you're an inspiration. I remember watching you on television and before that reading your work, and since then following you. So it is an honor for me to have you on the podcast. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Zaid. The honor and pleasure was all mine, by the way.